Hi, folks. Welcome back to Code and Concrete, where we share the latest trends and the stories of trailblazers in the built environments. I'm your host, Matthew Schneider, the CEO at Building Inc. Joining me today, I have a very special guest. I have Paul Doherty, and he's the managing partner of the Digit Group, a Singapore-registered smart city real estate development and investment company. As seen on Bloomberg TV and the Wall Street Journal, acknowledged by CNBC as one of America's business titans, and reported by Forbes as changing the world, Paul is an award-winning architect, a senior fellow of the Design Futures Council, and a fellow of the International Facility Management Association. He has 2 books out recently, which are Smart Cities, Reimagining the Urban Experience, and Unlocking the Metaverse, a strategic guide for the future of the built environment, which rated #1 new release and an editor's pick on Amazon.com. Well, Paul, welcome to the show. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Matt. And that last thing about Amazon just being picked as an editor's pick and everything else. It's the first time my mom knows what I do for a living. It's like she got that. I'm like, okay, good. It took long.
Quite a title.
Yeah, it was kind of cool to get that, and I think that's what we're in interesting times, obviously, but I think the awareness factor of a lot of these titles and what those books mean and that type of thing is finally starting to be absorbed. I'm watching how the younger generation in our industry, they're getting this. Right. And now it's a matter of process and actually implementing a lot of these really, really cool ideas that are now actionable, where we can see measurable change.
Right. And that's one of the topics that I hope that we can get into. There's a lot of visionary technology and even some buzzwords throughout these questions, but the big question, the looming question is how do we actually actualize and realize these changes? And you hinted at it, process is a big portion of that, not just coming up with the idea, but then implementing it successfully and at scale. That's the big challenge in construction and real estate right now. The big hurdle. How do we get everyone on board with this stuff? But we'll dive into some of that later. First, Paul, I want to talk about you because I just rambled off your phenomenal biography. How did you even get here today?
I am Forrest Gump. Period. I don't know sometimes how things happen, but I get involved and meet some very important people. Sometimes I get imposter syndrome with it. I'm like, am I supposed to be here? But the bottom line is ideas are out there. And I got very, very fortunate and lucky to be able to describe how these newer changes, be it through human process, be it through technology innovation, I'm able to water it down to different types of audiences. I speak a lot differently to the White House than I do to my friends over in a construction company that are on site. But the ability, I think, to help explain things to people and don't talk down to them, but also don't have it where you're talking so highfalutin that people miss the point. What I'm finding about adoption, trying to do this my entire life, I feel like I've been pushing a boulder up the hill, is how do you make it so that that one person sees that, wow, that's a better way of working, and give them the courage, because it really is a courageous thing to change. People don't like to change. I like to change my underwear, but people don't like to change, right? And at the end of the day, I think that providing courage to change what you feel is comfortable so that it becomes comfortable. The change is comfortable, be it because I'm making more money or I'm saving time, or I'm getting a better quality of skill, of product, of what I do. Right. I think those have been the biggest changes I've seen over the past 30 years of what the measures are, because I've taken a lot of looks at other industries to see how did they get that to change? How did they do it? And sometimes it's not just an edict from like the C-suite to say, we're going to work this way. How do you get people to adapt and transform themselves when they don't want to transform themselves? So, finding what those levers are and what's important to a certain community, a certain profession, a certain role of what a person does on a site, or in the back office, is a continuous learning exercise. And sometimes I look at it and you can get frustrated, like, why aren't people seeing this? Well, it's not their fault. It's how are you communicating? And are you actually hitting those levers that people can go, aha, I get this. Wow. When we were trying to understand what happens when we have construction documents that are in three dimensions, meaning BIM, right? We went from 2D electronic pencils of CAD. How do you convince people that working in 3D is a better way of working? We're still suffering through that. But at the end of the day, we have to make some concessions sometimes, right? Because I thought, hey, building information modeling, we live in a 3D world, we work in a 3D world, we should be, our drawings should represent that. And a lot of people are today are calling those like digital twins, right? But for the most part, people are used to what they're used to. And CAD was optimal because it didn't try and do too much, right? It was just an electronic pencil. I'm still doing things in 2D and I'm still interpreting things in 2D. But the number one use for BIM today is to create these wonderful environments, hopefully beautiful architecture and engineering. But what are most people doing? They're printing out 2D construction documents from BIM. It's like, what are we doing? Like, we haven't really made that leap. Why? Because people aren't comfortable and they don't trust the information and they actually don't trust the tool as much as they should. So I think, for the rest of my career, I know that will always be a continuous learning exercise. But at the end of the day, we really have a need in our industry for more workers, skilled workers that know what they're doing, the electricians, the plumbers, the mechanical folks, the trades out there, the framers to our friends in concrete, right? This is where the rubber meets the road because a lot of the people that are being recruited into our industry today, they work with different tools than the previous generation. A lot of these kids, right? Even though they may be plumbers out of a Ford F-150, guess what? They know how to code. They know how to code. They're not waiting for the big software companies to come out with their next release. They're treating information technology tools and data the same way they would if they had to modify a saw or a hammer or learn different ways of getting that fastener, that nail into that particular substrate. And is it with a hammer or is it with a nail gun? That's an innovation, right? But we constantly go back to the IT piece of things, though, because that makes people's lives easier. I'm watching these kids on site with apps that they have been using for a while, but they keep it to themselves because that's their differentiation in the marketplace. They're really good at it, right? But when we start to then take this idea of workflow, what would happen if that could be shared? Right. And so that's why I love asking questions with these kids out in the field. I don't get mad when they have their phone out. It's like, what are you doing? Right. And it's not an accusatory, what are you doing? It's, I really want to understand because if we could scale that, then your handoff of what you're doing in this workflow to the next trade is tremendous. Look at what we've done. We've opened up communications. And I think that, as I take a look at my career being in the field, running real projects, it's always about the teams that work together because they liked each other, right? And I think we forget that with IT and the implementation of all the buzzwords as you had mentioned at the beginning, where the AIs, the blockchains, the digital twins, the this thing, the that thing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're really good at it because the project is only as good as the weakest link. And that means that we really should stop taking a look at just the software because software is disposable today. It doesn't you may use it for this one project, but you may not use it on the next. Why? Because it's an app, right? And it's about data flow. And when I take a look at how our communications have really changed over the years from paper, which is still number one, but into things like, fax machines and then email. And now I can't tell you how many WhatsApp groups I'm involved with, right? I don't need email anymore because WhatsApp does it all for me. I can access documents, I can access the data flow. And as we all learn about how each other works, those teams that I mentioned with those really, really good and successful projects, The most important thing was the relationships between the people and having not miscommunication, but don't have them anticipate that there's going to be a problem, right? That trust issue, I think, is at the forefront of the next 5 years. And a lot of that's going to have to deal with data that we have not trusted in the past. Right. And that means that the world of smart contracts, in my opinion, are the next big breakthrough for our entire industry. If you're in infrastructure, residential, commercial, industrial, smart contracts, because we run on contracts, right? That's why there's general contractors out there. Once we go into that model and people start to trust that and realize, wow, this creates a transparency like I've never had before. The people that hide behind the inappropriate way of communication, I'll get you on the next project, I'll make it up to you over here, or any sort of weird stuff that people do, especially, in certain professions in our industry where they make money off the inefficiencies. Having GCs that really rely not on quality, but on change order management. Come on, really? Those days are numbered. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people that don't like it and will probably take a look at all these new processes and ways of working, but and just go, like roll their eyes and like, yeah, like that'll happen because we're a very localized, industry. We rely on those relationships with our, supply chain partners and whatnot, and being able to get this thing done. But I think that the use of smart contracts is really, really going to help. Number one, create trust, which will be a better environment for the younger generation to learn.
I agree. I'll comment on the smart contract stuff because it's based on blockchain, and I highly believe that blockchain is going to add auditability to many industries, but especially those with multiple parties involved and multiple parties that could traditionally benefit from data asymmetry. And so getting people on the same page is very important. And then there's the programmability elements that smart contracts offer. In many regards, they're still a few years off from being either smart or contracts. But as soon as we get both of those things together, then yes, absolutely. Any two parties that have a relationship generally have a contract between them. And if we can start to digitally program and enforce that, that is much better and saving time and money on legal because we won't even have to consider it as a potential outcome. So I hope that that becomes a little bit more obsolete because we know how many projects struggle with dispute and ultimately dispute resolution. And next thing you know, you're up to your neck with expenses that way. But I want to circle back. So you're an architect by trade, but now you're so heavily involved in IT. At what point did you decide you need to get more involved in the technology that's out there? Was there some sort of epiphany that the current methods are awful, or did you read something? How did you become the Paul Doherty that you are today?
When I was in school, architectural school, my second year, I dropped out. And my mom and dad were not happy because I was the first one in our immediate family to go to college, right? And I became a musician. I was a keyboard player for a band that was signed to Neat Records, which was distributed through Warner Brothers. And we made it pretty big. We were called Carl and Passion. We were the house band at the China Club in Manhattan back in the 80s. And I also then got to play because we were at the China Club with members of David Bowie's band one night and working with Frank Zappa was in the audience once and really loved our music. It was just a great time, right? Um, that dream fell a bit short. I'm kind of like that movie Almost Famous. Like just about got there. But I went back to school, but I lost 2.5 years, so I wasn't with my classmates, and I really, really focused in on just being a great student because I wanted to be an architect now, right? Although I had to relearn things, but that's when things really start to take off, Matt, where I had this idea that buildings should be computers, and I knew how many mainframes worked all the way down to PCs because I had to rip these things apart and put them back together again because I had to learn that in order to showcase them at Comdex and PC Expo and whatnot. So no, it wasn't like an epiphany moment, like boom. It wasn't a book I read or wrote, or articles I read. It was a slowly evolving learning exercise that I have to this day. And when you're an architect, you have to be a master at everything because you have to orchestrate it. And I feel the same way in that technology just became another design tool. It was something that was not a spreadsheet. It was not a Word document. It wasn't a presentation tool. It wasn't even CAD. It was, those are the things that get you to the built environment. So I've always had this notion that the digital world and the physical world, they mesh for me. They're one. They're not separate tools. And it used to drive me crazy that, you go through putting up $100 million office building, and then you're like, oh yeah, we need Wi-Fi, huh? It's like, why isn't that thought of during the design programming? It's just another set of tools. So that's where that came from, man. It was one of those things that I didn't want it to happen, but it goes to show you that I am Forrest Gump. I just have to be at the right place, at the right time, working for IBM.
Right. And now look at you today. The building as a computer is a core thesis for you. And it's reflective of, I think, a systems way of thinking where everything is connected in some way. And if the inner workings of a computer are, and then even externally, computer to computer, so too could a building where all of its components are related, and then the buildings themselves are related or connected in some way. And that's the makeup of our cities, which today are generally speaking highly fragmented, and it's actually quite obtuse. It's shocking that we have made it as far as we have. I think that's just the human instinct to survive because the systems that we've built are so fragmented and interrupted in many ways. And I hope that we can offer an epiphany to the real estate developers or any real estate company because we all have to work together through this episode. These concepts are very visionary, although they're quickly becoming reality. And so I want to catch these folks up to speed. What should these real estate companies and any parties, any people involved know about the technologies that we're highlighting today, the digital twins, AI, blockchain? What should they know about these that are not just buzzwords?
Boy, I think that individually, when you take any of the solutions that are created by these technologies, if you're not combining them together, you're creating cotton candy. Look at AI. Everyone's in AI. Now, there are people that are really doing it well. Like one of my 14-year-old boys, he has an AI company. He's 14. And guess what? It's pretty damn good. I'm like, wow, way to go. But I even told him, I said, that as a standalone is good. But if you are a leader with these newer technologies, these data-centric technologies, not software-centric, but data-centric, first mover advantage is not an advantage. It means you're a target, right?
Really?
Where in software, first mover advantage meant I got as many users as I want, and you just created a threshold that was too high to actually compete. With the world, especially of AI, with the fast changing speeds, I live here in Memphis, and literally 20 minutes from where I live is Grok, the XAI shop, right? And they are quadrupling the size of what they're doing here in Memphis in the next 6 months. So everyone is competing, even geopolitically, right? Who's going to win? Is it China versus US? Is this the old space race, like with the old Soviet Union and the US? And in essence, it is. But again, AI by itself, and especially in our industry, where everyone's talking about AI, and there's some people way over their skis. It's like, good luck with that, right? And yet millions are being poured into these companies, and I'm going, oy, 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 oy. That's not what it's about. It's about AI uses data. What smart contracts do, what Ethereum does as a blockchain system, is that it makes data immutable. Because when you actually input the information into the blockchain, it is not a field like in a PDF, which can be manipulated, right? It's written into the source code. So you can't change it. So let's say we have an agreement, Matt. You're Matt, I'm Paul. We agree, we have a contract. Guess what? That is now immutable, which means we can reuse that when we start working together again because we trust the data. Now imagine AI not taking the data that we have now on some sort of PDF, a Bloombeam Pro Core, yada, yada, yada type of thing. That's almost irrelevant now because you can't trust it. I'm looking at that as a huge solution that has not been solved yet because we don't trust the information, we don't trust each other, right? So, what we're doing is actually taking a different approach. Yeah, I may be known for IT, but what I really am is a real estate developer, but a different kind. I'm not just the guy that buys property, puts up a facility, that asset gets flipped and I make money. If making money is the only reason why you're in this industry, go to another industry. It's not just about that. Yes, we can maximize things, but there's going to be better ways of making money. You had mentioned blockchain about the smart and the contract. I'm looking at it a little differently. I think the contracts are going to change where they're just not agreements, but they're your general ledger for your project. Now things get interesting. One of the things that we're doing is that we are going to be making a big announcement that we're taking a publicly traded company private. It's a rather large one, very well known in the industry. And instead of being a subscription-based software company, we're going to make it a project transaction revenue base that uses the blockchain to actually create a 10-cent per transaction system. Guess what is on every major project? A 10% contingency line item. That's how this new company is going to make money. We're going to take the money that's already allocated by the owner and say, we're going to save so much money in transparency of process between less change orders, less rework out in the field because everything's trusted, that we're going to make more money doing that than we ever would with subscriptions. Right now, this company makes about $6 billion in revenue every year, but the way that this system works, that in 5 years it'll be worth a little over $30 billion in revenue. That's how you grow. That's how you change. This is why education with, podcasts like this are very, very, very important because at the end of the day, we have to educate and train the existing people that are there, but also be positioned and framed that when people go, what do I want to do when I graduate high school? Do I want to go to college or I want to go vocational school, whatever it is, we're attractive because there's only three things, Matt, that we need to survive as a human species on this spaceship of planet Earth. And that is safe food, fresh water, and shelter. We have an obligation to ourselves and to the rest of humanity to make sure that we're healthy. And right now, because this change is happening, and I'm seeing such really cool forward momentum with people that didn't grow up in our industry, but they're like, wow, this technology can help this process and we can actually now move forward. That just warms my heart because at the end of the day, now we're talking about this idea of abundance, that we can all make money and a lot of it if we start thinking differently. So one of the things that being on a blockchain does, especially with the power of AI being associated with it, is that we can actually, if we are doing the general ledger on a per project basis for every project in the world, and you're making 10 cents on every transaction, not only is that a lot of money for the company, but it can also be shared. And this is how it's shared. So I've been involved with crypto for a little over 15 years. Know it very, very well. But it was built upon this idea that you should believe me, right? Bitcoin is worth this amount of money. Why? Well, just trust me, right? It's tulips in Holland, right? So the way that crypto, even Ripple and all these other things are built, it's built on trust, and they're trying so many different ways of saying, what's the thing that's backing this? Rather than just a bunch of crypto bros convincing themselves that this is worth this amount of money. So with this new system that will be unleashed in September, we are going to make sure that that general ledger is also a coin, a project coin that is fractionalized. That project coin's value is based on the value of the real estate itself. Let me say that again because it's really important to understand. The value of the real estate is now replicated, it's digital twinned into the actual coin, the crypto for that project. So no matter what role you are now, because now there's going to be a central payment system based on a per project level, right? That says, all right, I submit my invoice. I'm a plumber. I have my bill of lading. I have all my stuff. Everything's accounted for. Submit. You're going to have a choice because what you're building is going to increase the value of the real estate. That's the reason why this asset is coming up to begin with. So, do I take 100% US dollars right into my bank account? Of course you do. It's no different than what you do today, except that you're not submitting to an owner or a GC. You're submitting to the system. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to be given a choice to say, I think my work is going to increase the value of this thing. And I'm going to take 5% of my invoice and keep it as that project coin. Now, over time, you're going to make more money on that little 5% bet, your investment, that the value of that real estate is going to increase because guess what? That value real estate's going to flip. It's going to be sold someday. Your windfall is going to be bigger than you ever would get by submitting an invoice. This is how we make money in the new construction world. This is how things happen. Now, this sounds like a crazy idea, right? Guess what? In the UAE, Abu Dhabi's doing this now. Now. Now, all of a sudden, you take a look at the actual real estate itself. Let's say it's a $100 million building, right? It's increased the value of that real estate to be, I don't know, maybe a $50 million raise. So for someone to buy that building is $150 million. Guess what? The crypto, because it's fractionalized and anyone can buy it, it's going to be more valuable crypto-wise than it ever would be physically. The digital representation, the digital real estate will be more valuable over time than the actual physical real estate itself. That is where the future's going. It's something that the existing administration in the White House is all over this. You think like it's all about Bitcoin and this thing and that thing. No. No, 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 no. This is about real estate, and guess who is actually involved with real estate that sits in the White House? Someone that gets this, and he wants crypto. So I wouldn't be surprised if this actually starts to raise a lot of eyebrows in the next 36 to, I'd say, 60 months. That I wouldn't be surprised if a system like this would not be part of the value of the US dollar because they're trying to make crypto part of that. So now imagine the world of real estate affecting dollar costs and value, along with being able to have everyone make more money than they ever did, which would attract the younger generation coming into our industry. So that's the big picture about what we're seeing.
Certainly a lot to unpack there. Um, all the way back to the time elements, I was thinking as we were talking about why blockchains are important for immutability. It's because time is constantly left out of our data, our data equations. We think about where it's stored or even how we're designing things, but we fail to realize that it becomes obsolete the minutes that it's exported, and that's highly risky. So digital twins are sort of this concept of real time as well as blockchains where I can see timestamps and any sort of modification that way. Next, the accountability portion, I think, is a big piece of this. Why would people want to be vested in a project or receive payments in a token form of that project? Well, one, because it could appreciate, but two, their good work is going to appreciate. And this is a big issue. When I was talking to Ralph Montag, I asked Ralph, why are so many people doing subpar jobs? And he said, well, because they can hand off their portion of the project to the next party and you move along. And worst case scenario, there's some sort of lawsuit down the line, but it's someone else's problem. And you have to try to retrace that and find the individuals involved. So having people vested into the long term of the project and its success over time, I think is a really good strategy and something that's uniquely capable using smart contracts. It's essentially attribution and being able to trace that back to some sort of digital identity, someone who was involved in the project and did their job properly. And now they are being compensated for that. In addition to the attribution, another major opportunity for smart contracts is the tradability. And this is where you're bringing real estate online and you're allowing that value to be calculated, recognized, and then used in all sorts of creative ways in capital markets, which previously were impossible because the properties were sitting in private markets. What's the value? Who has access to it? We're not going to use it as collateral. We're not going to trade it on a secondary market. So there's this tightening relationship between the data, which we can now source, aggregate, and attest, and the value that comes out of that data. Because ultimately, that's numbers, it's health and performance of these properties, and we can use it for all sorts of creative things. Now, I want to segue into smart cities, which is in some ways you're the godfather of smart cities. At least that's the title that I've assigned to you. We've seen that around the world, people are calling their cities smarter, but they often fail due to misalignment of stakeholders. Something gets left out of the big picture. So I want to ask, how do we maintain momentum in the development of our smart cities and ensure alignments between all the parties involved, such as the governments, developers, and tech providers?
Yeah, and that's on the stakeholder side of delivery of solutions. I think where what you're talking about with certain initiatives that have failed is because they've forgotten about the most important people, and that are the end users, the citizens, the visitors. And the experiences that they either receive or don't receive. A prime example would be what happened in Toronto in the waterfront with Sidewalk Labs, the Google experiment. They had a small patch of real estate that they were so excited to get everything that they wanted that they were trying to shove, 10 pounds of potatoes into a single pound bag. And it was like overwhelming. It was like, where was the storylines? They were doing tech for tech's sake instead of it being for the end user. And most importantly, their communications to the different stakeholders was misaligned hugely because all they were doing was showing off what's possible instead of asking the citizens what do they need, right? I mean, a very, very simple thing. What do you need? And they were pointing to what Henry Ford said, that, if I asked the end users what they wanted, they'd say more horses instead of a car, right? So I understand that dilemma as well. But when it came to a tech company trying to be a real estate developer, that's a recipe for disaster. Stick to your lanes, because at the end of the day, when you're Google and you're trying to feed that machine with data, that data is from Canadian citizens going into a US company. In most cases, that is a blueprint for espionage. Right? So when you have Canadians protesting around this job site, I was floored, because the Canadians I know, the only time they protest is when they run out of beer at an ice hockey match, right? And that's about it, because they're the most friendly, docile people on the planet. But for them to get riled up, it must have been something important. And that gave me a huge lesson. I was actually on the Toronto government side, guiding them, prodding them, that type of thing, because like I said, let the real estate developers be the real estate developers and let them partner with like a tech company like a Google with Sidewalk Labs. But that became something of a bellwether for the rest of other smart city initiatives around the world, including what are we doing? There was an initiative in Boston about how they were putting together a smart parking system so that they put a measure in place saying that people that are looking for parking spots are contributing to the carbon exhaust of their cars looking for a parking spot. If we can be smarter about that, we would cut carbon emissions. But at the end of the day, the end users, well, if they found a spot, they just pull into it. I mean, come on, there's human behavior involved. So when I take a look at alignment of stakeholders and real money being spent on initiatives, sometimes the solutions that are transparent to the process. In other words, I don't want to know how come using this system to create this podcast, all the mechanisms involved and all the measures that need to be in place. What I'm worried about and what I care about is the conversation. I don't care how it happens. I'm having a conversation. We need to ratchet that down, that, being smart is sometimes being simple. And that means that when I get involved with a project, no matter how big, no matter how small, my go-to person for getting into pre-design, pre-planning is a cultural anthropologist. Her name is Dr. Karen Stevenson, and she has me understand all of the different elements that are making up that spot on planet Earth and what is going to be important and what's not going to be important to those people. Be it climate, be it religion, be it geopolitics, be it whatever what those things are. She breaks it down into an understandable way of saying, what happens on the north side of Chicago and the different priorities, be it education, crime, traffic, whatever it is almost the total opposite of what happens in South Chicago, yet it's Chicago. So is there something that we can do that starts to help the different stakeholders get their slice of the pie while also thinking abundantly what's good for everyone? And sometimes that is a very, very difficult conversation to have because most people, especially in the world of politics, especially with elected officials, they're more worried about the scarcity issues, right? So to talk about abundantly about how things work, I find there are certain pockets that really take to that type of philosophy of if I do this, it's not just for me and my constituents, it's also for the greater good, right? So that's when I like to take a look at certain recipes that work, right? That, with certain cuisines, you would never use dairy on fish in Italian cooking, right? But there's uses of dairy in other ways, such as putting it into a bolognese, right? So you have to be careful about how to use these different recipes. In other words, these different solutions that are out there, in order to create the flavor that is going to be tasted by those people. Here's a great case in point. So at NEOM, world's largest project since the Roman Empire, right, in Saudi Arabia. They are adjacent to Jordan, where NEOM's placed, which is in the northwest quadrant of Saudi Arabia. And we were looking at, well, how do we populate this thing? Is it going to be a city state? Because that's really what NEOM is, not just a city, it's like a city state, to show the rest of Saudi Arabia what can really happen in the future as their society starts to emerge out of shackles of tradition and not really growing with the rest of the world. The leadership there is fantastic now because they're saying we need a vision. So I was part of a team that created what's called Vision 2030. And that is a roadmap for all the different elements that make up Saudi Arabia. But let's use NEOM as the petri dish. Here's our experiment so we can point to things so that when the other ancient cities can see what's happening in NEOM, they have a roadmap to go by. Well, here's the problem. Is it going to be a city state for the rich? Right? And is that really where we want to go? Or, what happens to the middle class? What happens to the growing middle class in a society and a community and a nation like that? So we looked at the refugees that are from Syria that are residing in the north part of Jordan. And these are professionals, and workers. There's doctors, lawyers, teachers, policemen, that type of thing that are living in refugee tents. What happens to their dignity? What happens to like the PTSD of we had a life in cities that were and villages that were there for a millennium that don't exist anymore? And with the current state of Syria, it's not going to be anytime soon before we start to have even the opportunity to repopulate that and rebuild, right? So they need a place to go. And what we're doing is taking a certain amount of that population and moving them down to the south border of Jordan so that they become Neomites, the first citizens in Neom. Now, one of the big things we needed to do is really think through, we don't want to create ghettos. In other words, there's 6 areas of Neom that are going to be their independent cities with their own themes, their own ways of having their storytelling. Like one is an industrial city, another one is a winter wonderland, believe it or not, which is called Trojana. Of course, everyone heard about the line. I hope. My own personal opinion, I'm not a big fan, but it just is what it is. But there's the Gulf of Aqaba, right, which is for the rich. So how do we start to balance this? And if they are trying to create a diverse, equitable, and inclusive society that can be emulated throughout the rest of Saudi Arabia over time, how do we then incorporate the geopolitics and the socioeconomic levels of you don't want to move these refugees into one part of Neom or one area of the 6 areas of Neom. You want them to be, dispersed and to fit in because they're going to be the first citizens of Neom. You don't want it that when people start moving in going, you don't want to go down there. That's where the Syrians are, right? Ghettos. We don't need that. We don't want that. So I needed to come up with a plan that created housing. And one of the things through learning about this whole idea of a of using cultural anthropology was that there are many dishes of food and different recipes and different cuisines that replicate each other. They just call them different things. In Israel, there is a very similar type of breakfast food that's similar to what's in Saudi Arabia. It's like an oatmealish type of dish, but they call it 2 separate things, so they think it's 2 separate dishes. It's the same thing. So one thing we decided to do was, wouldn't it be interesting if we created, a central hub that you come in from the street and you go into like a central courtyard, and that's how you enter your home. That in that central courtyard, we do have areas to eat. We have outdoor cooking for certain conditions, but all of our kitchens face the courtyard with operable windows. So you may be coming home and you smell something that your neighbor's cooking. It's like, that smells delicious. Knock on the door, including just human nature. What is that? That smells good. Oh, would you want to come for dinner? Blah, 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 blah. But more importantly, how about fusion? Being able to understand, well, we put raisins in this, or we put this, chickpea dish, and this is how we changed that. And people come together through food. That is the great denominator. It's not socioeconomic class. It's like that person has the most awesome lamb, right? And it begins to build community. So it really starts at that level. Basic things that we have not really exploited. We think it's going to be, some sort of smart building that's going to do something cool. Yeah, we can do that. But it gets back to the human experience of needing security, safety, and inspiration. It could be through entertainment, it could be through education, it could be done through healthcare. But those are the basic elements, those basic ingredients, like where you need salt and pepper in most Western dishes, right? You need soy sauce for most, Northern Asian dishes. Understanding that about where you're doing what you're doing is the basic building blocks to then creating magic, because people should not have to struggle to learn how to open a door. When I was living in Shanghai, after Chinese New Year, it was always interesting to watch the migrant farmers come looking for work, and they would bring their families with them. And they came off the train and they were shocked trying to get out of the train station because they did not know how the magic doors would open up and close. They didn't understand that there was a pressure pad right there, and they would sit there for hours just amazed. Like, do they have a special app on their phone? Do they, sing, like some sort of, phrase? How does this thing happen? Magic. And when you get down to the, to that level of understanding that there's going to be a lot of people coming from the rural areas of the world into cities over the next 50 years, where we will be an urban-based human society for the majority of our people. Well, we should be taking better care rather than gimmicks, rather than, how cool is that? So I get elected. How about thinking in a greater whole? What is this going to do? How does this help my family? How does this help my neighbors? And how does this help create urban environments that are nurturing, not a place that is to be feared? Now, in every city, just like the internet, there's good places and bad places. And we have to understand that that is part of human nature as well. Humans have lots of different needs. We have spiritual needs, we have intellectual needs, we have sexual needs, right? Those are the things that we have to adapt to and celebrate rather than be, parochial and just not talk about this stuff. So, as we move forward as a society, I'm looking at tools like AI that will make us more human. It'll make us more human over time because it's going to give back time. How we use that time, well, that's going to be the goal and quality measure of all of us. But I'm hoping that it allows for conversations like this and for people taking time out of their day to listen to this podcast to say, huh, I learned something, and then be able to have another conversation and raise the level of the quality of conversation so that we can come to better understandings with each other. There's always going to be yin and yang in the world. That's just life, right? Good and bad. But I'm starting to see just a very cool optimism, especially in the world of design, construction, in the world of real estate, where we're not stuck behind the old world of software and platforms and this thing and that's not the way I used to do it, and and because I'm limited with my design capabilities, because I'm limited by the tools that I have, Revit is not good at twisting things or making circular images. They make big effing boxes. That's what they do. That's what Revit's good at. What have we had over the past 20 years? BFBs, big frickin' boxes everywhere, right? Except Rhino and Grasshopper did something very special. It allowed you to twist them. If I see one more twisty building, I'm actually going to go bonkers, because that's not architecture. It's just you're limited with the use of your damn technology. Try your hand. hand drafting, sketching, that is the existential power of what your limitation of how you can use a technology. Think before you do. Just because your technology allows you to do it, that doesn't mean you should. So I'm liking that there's breakthroughs now, especially with the world of AI and how that's affecting the speed to a solution that allows me not to have 1,000,000 choices during, schematic design, but during design development, it's giving me more time to get into that quality. That's what I mean about being more human. So yeah, I've had a few moments to think about this stuff, and I really have no passion about this topic.
None at all. Wow, so much to unpack there. Phenomenal. Where do I want to start? I guess the social impact of design is often left out. It's difficult to say why that reason is. It's probably, generally speaking, profits or the struggle of having to take into account perspectives that are going to limit how much we can develop. Because if you design for people, you are not going to design always the biggest, boldest, most occupied building. You have to think about, well, where do people actually want to live, work, and play? So that, as we call them, social impact assessment is very important because it takes into account the human element. What do people in this area, either already living or those who will move here and live here, what are they? Who are they? What are they going to act like? And what's that relationship going to be? You can't just disrupt an existing ecosystem and force a new way of life. So being considerate of that. Then just one simple comment on the food portion. It reminds me very much of Anthony Bourdain, where to learn people, you need to go eat their food. And I've enjoyed that as I travel around the world, bonding with people over food.
And
I,
always drink the local beer, right? That was
yeah.
Bourdain's main thing,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't have too much beer. I can't have the gluten, but like in Japan, sake was the next best alternative. That was my first experience with that, and I'll tell you what, it got me well acquainted with Japan. Um, Now, what's also interesting is how you have not necessarily an anti technologist perspective when it comes to designing cities, but you are saying the technology is not the plan. It's just a tool, and it happens to be a rather limiting tool. We need to fall back on human intuition and creativity and abstract thoughts in order to accomplish real development progress. I guess, how do we strike a balance between tools? Because we want our digital twins, we want to use BIM and the software that helps us phase out these projects and tell us where the timber is going to go. But we also know that that boxes us in considerably. How do we teeter this totter?
There's a couple of ways of looking at that, and I think it really comes down to a couple of truths. Number one is that we focused way too much as an industry, and in particular with the designers, the architects and engineers, as a tool for delivery. And we focus so much on that. It's going to save us time. It's going to do this. It'll help us with rework. It'll help us with revisions. Blah 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 blah. It'll help us with design. That has been almost a 99% focus of what I hear at these industry tech conferences, right? How's it going to make me better? Me, 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 me. When we should be looking at those tools as part of design tools. How do we integrate it into the built environment? That is an entire white canvas for us about how to integrate the tech, not as an afterthought, but as the fourth utility. We have MEP, we also need IT, right? Which means that we can start to make our buildings more human. There are two major proofs of concepts that have been implemented. One is with my friend Kimona Numa, has been working with the California State Community College system. So you're talking about a very large inventory. But there are certain buildings that are common in every one of those community colleges. There's always a storage facility, right? There's always a high performance lab, and there's always classrooms. What we decided to do was to take the existing building management and building automation systems. They're already existing. We're not going to replace them. But we map it over with voice, and we give personalities to it using very similar technology to Siri and Alexa. So that when you are looking at a storage facility, we gave that an introverted personality. It really doesn't do too much. It's not used often. It just is what it is. It's very introverted. As opposed to a high performance lab that is used all the time and it's crazy and there's lots of things going on. So we gave it a Valley Girl, like, oh my God, right? And then we gave a classroom an Oxford English accent because it's very stately, right? And what happens is when you tie that together with the existing systems, we can actually have a relationship with the building. The building actually talks with us and is proactive for maintenance issues. Rings, Kaiman, Paul, this is classroom 102. I think you may want to come and change the air filter. So imagine now what's being worked on with AI, with Amazon, with Alexa, and Google with Siri, about how the smart speakers now are becoming smart homes, especially when they tie together with things like Ring and Nest and all these other digital tools. What we're creating right now is a digital physical relationship. And when you give it a personality, it will learn over time the habits of your family, of you. What's how can I anticipate those needs? There's an author called Joe Pine, one of my dear friends. He is a Harvard business book author. He's the guy that coined the term the experience economy, right? Which is a great term used by many, including Disney. He also created mass customization. So he's really on the forefront of all of this. His prediction is that through the integration of these tools that help us live in our homes, in our office buildings, at the factory, that they will become so smart that they will help anticipate needs to be a genius platform. I love that because right now Alexa knows that my son has guitar lessons at 5:45 on Tuesdays. It also knows that it's a half-hour lesson that I then go pick up a pizza and then the family has pizza. It now anticipates those needs, that it understands my PayPal account will actually call up the local pizzeria and deliver it so I don't have to stop, increasing my quality of life. All done without me saying a word. That type of anticipation of need is something that will be a truth from here on out, and we will have a relationship the same way that we do with butlers and dogs and all that stuff with our built environment. You will have an emotional attachment and have a confidant, a conscious about that. So when the built environment creates its own consciousness, that is beyond smart city. We're now talking about cognitive approaches to how things operate, to make things better. The first, cow paths of this were when, the sensors around certain traffic intersections would anticipate, well, if you go 40 miles an hour, which is the speed limit, you should be hitting green lights, depending on local flows of traffic. And then you would only hit the red light when absolutely necessary, right? To increase your quality of life, to get to your work better or going home or getting to the shops and getting home safely. Those were the first cow paths, but now we're getting really smart when the cars are smart and interacting with it. So again, traffic being affected by it, healthcare being affected by it. At NEOM, we created a healthcare system where we were asked by the leadership at NEOM, could you create a hub and spoke system for our new city state? And I said, you mean physically? And they said, yeah, a general hospital with lots of clinics or specialized, medical facilities that would feed the general hospital when appropriate. And I said, I don't think you want to do that. I said, let's start thinking about what that need is about the patient journey. Because we're all going to be patients at one time. Just because we're human, we're also going to be incapacitated and needing accessible design as we get older, right? So being handicapped is part of the human journey and experience. So what would happen if we could help that and actually create a journey while you're healthy? And so we created Dr. Neon, which is an app that you are the central piece of the entire story, not the general hospital. You're the hub. And the spokes are all the services that are available to you, including how to design a city so that you don't realize that you've just walked 10,000 steps today. How do you do that? Well, I know that the residential section is over here, the transportation hub is here, food, beverage, and retail is over here, and work, factory, commercial properties are over here. I could make it that you don't even know that you've just walked 10,000 steps because I've designed it that way. That's smart design. Has nothing to do with technology, but you can tie it together with your Apple Watch or Fitbit or whatever things you have that work with Dr. Neom so that it can actually allow it to start to make suggestions, not to be an annoying nag, but to say, listen, you're looking to get out to lunch. It's 11 a.m. By 12 p.m., 12 noon, we know that these restaurants are going to be full. These fast food places are here. Here's some recommendations. That's the type of thing of building in wellness before people get sick so that you actually can, I mean, you have acute situations all the time, but the chronic stuff is something we can help ahead of time. That's still architecture. That's the built environment, but it's tied together with healthcare. As I mentioned earlier, this turns into Da Vinci's quote, right? Learn how to see again. Everything is connected to everything. So the built environment at its apex is going to be when we take into consideration the journey of education, the journey of your healthcare, the journey of your life, so that when you are at the end of life, you can look back and say, well, that was a life well lived.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the cognitive properties or the cognitive buildings because when I first heard about Paul Doherty, it was on that topic. And I thought, giving personalities to buildings, that's the first time that I've heard of that. But it really makes sense. It's not just how do we build cities for people, but how do we think of cities as the living, breathing environments that they are? And true integration with the human elements is synergy, it's chi, it's energy, I think. And to abstract from that, there is a real relationship between our health and well being and our cities, either how they're structured, how they're operating, how they're designed. You mentioned the steps portion. To give the American perspective where we don't walk anywhere, there is some correlation between all the sitting and driving and non activity that we do, and let's say weight gain, right? The amount of calories that you burn when you are walking up a flight of steps in Hong Kong, or you are traversing across the city, or riding a bicycle in the Netherlands, that is very healthy. You're getting your sunshine and your fresh air. And that's an element of smarter design. And I guess to take a step back, smart cities don't just mean technology. This is a major misconception, and I've played into it with the way that I've asked these questions. But intelligent design is thinking of six different pillars, technology being a feature, but not really the outcome that we're striving towards. We're thinking about how do we properly govern this? How do we have people that are adaptive, digitally literate, educated, that like each other? How do we have an environment that's clean and taking into account climate impact as well? What does it mean to have accessible social services or equity within that? These are all design elements, and technology is just, it's there. It's there. And I have to admit, the way that I framed the conversation is hey, we're going to use digital twins and what's the best software tool for designing cities? But that's not the right question. And so I'm so pleased that you answered the way that you did because I think you're one step or two ahead of me in this discussion. But that's why you're here. I would say there's not too many who know as much as you about this topic. And even the Vision 2030, do you know how many times I have mentioned that to people? And I didn't know that you, Paul, had a part in that play. That's fantastic. When did that vision first or the
The
Vision
first
2030 start?
Actually, in 2015, it was formally drafted the first 6 months of 2016 when I was living in Riyadh, working with Boston Consulting and McKinsey and Company as their subject matter expert. I had to learn all the different things that they were trying to do between Aramco and this group and that group, and also taking into consideration that this next generation led by Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the Crown Prince, this was really his baby. He needed to. He's formally educated in England and has a lot of that Western philosophy about that. But he's also a gamer. right? So you you put those two things together and you get Vision 2030, right? He likes the formal process, but he wanted to have guidelines so that he wasn't accused of being the only voice in this. He needed to have that pathway so that he go, hey, listen, I'm just following the plan. So then the clerics could be like, okay. Okay. And again, as the clerics die off, his generation will be taking over. I mean, he's admired because of that throughout Saudi Arabia by his subjects, right? And I find him to have a wonderful open mind. At the same time, though, he has to fend off, political adversaries. Although he is quote unquote he is the acting ruler because his dad, unfortunately, is going through his journey of Alzheimer's, right? But he's still the king and he's still alive. So, really interesting balance happening there. But when it came to coming up with what that plan was, I had to wait a lot until the last part of the delivery because my chapter that I had to write was about the city of the future, which became Neon. But a lot of it had to do with a lot of these stories, about the food, about the health care, wellness side of things, without seeming like a pontiff or pontificating about, well, must do a wellness thing and putting on the Superman cape of, and it must be sustainable and blah, 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 because then it turns into a propaganda tool rather than real solutions. So, I'm very careful, still a liaison between royal courts in both Jeddah and Riyadh, and the rank and file. What's interesting though is about how they are reassessing a lot of the budget. But this was part of the plan. We wanted to show, oh my God, they're really doing it. They got Red Sea Global. They have, Qiddiya. We got Doria Gate. We got all these mega projects going on that would supersede the last attempt from the previous King Abdullah, because those did not do as well. King Abdullah Economic City, Cake, a couple of these other ones, mostly economic cities, quote unquote, they were showcasing a bit, but they did not do what this generation's doing, which is connecting the dots, everything connecting to everything. So yeah, I'm very proud of how it's going through its iterations. There was meant to be that huge outlay of money to begin with, but then there's the fear of missing out, right? Which means now they're looking for foreign investment. That's why you will see in London and New York and other major hubs, Hong Kong, Tokyo, that there are literally almost like real estate development showrooms for people to go there and go, wow, not to just buy, a house or an apartment thing, but it was really to showcase to other foreign countries, you should invest in here too. So that's the next phase, is to get foreign investment in there. That's why the Ministry of Investment Saudi Arabia, or MISA, it's called, are now the managers. It's not the Public Investment Fund or the Sovereign Wealth Fund, called the PIF. MISA is really driving a lot of this now, and it's interesting to watch it turn now a little bit more commercial. Right? So a lot of the big work's done. Now it turns into delivery. So no more PowerPoints, no more design phase. Let's get into delivery. And the number one of the 6 projects, Trojena, that's the only one that has a deadline. They are going to be hosting the Asian Winter Games. So it's the size of Belgium in square meters. They've broken ground, but it's mountainous. So you asked, a very important question before about, how do you attract people into these environments, or are there people there already? In the case of Trojan, we got to attract people there. And there's a deadline. In literally 4 years, they're hosting on TV this thing. And I looked at what Beijing did for the Winter Olympics, where they had the fake snow and yada, 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 but they pulled it off, right? And that means that there are certain areas that I know that need to be developed quicker rather than, maybe not having the full picture in place. Right. But the key elements, those iconic buildings, the hotels, making sure that the athletes and, more importantly, the media and the press are really, really satisfied with what they saw, because that will then initialize more foreign direct investment in order to complete out the vision. The idea is that with a successful Asian Winter Games, that they would then bid, like they were successful for the FIFA World Cup, they want the Winter Olympics in the desert. Right? So it's a big deal, but this is how we're going to get around the issues of how do you construct something in the mountains between all of the different types of infrastructure and then the actual buildings themselves. And I'm using the same theory for the rebuilding of Ukraine. And that is, if there's not a population there, you want to attract them, but you also don't want to, like in the case of Ukraine, there may have been a city of 50,000 people in the western part of Ukraine that doesn't exist anymore. That's the way the Russians work. They level it. So how do you then attract people to come back? Or in the case of Trojena, attract people to come? And that means that you need to have services. You need schools. You need healthcare. You need, grocery stores. You need transportation, and you need homes. We're going to a modular design all the way through it. And that's the only way we can get it up into the mountains in the case of Trojena, and the only way that you're going to properly spend the money to right size every one of those towns and villages and cities that need to be built in Ukraine. So it's very interesting parallels and measures, right? Because if there was a 500 bed hospital in that village before the war, but now there's less people and you only need 50 beds, well, let's think modularly. You don't want to build something and then knock it down. We're terrible like that in the built environment. But what would happen if we could reuse rooms, right? And make it aesthetically beautiful? That it does not need to look like, a trailer park. And it shouldn't. It doesn't need to be just boxes and rectangles, and then you configure things. What we've learned by really doing prefabricated and industrialized construction in China very successfully. We actually had an entire expose in Forbes magazine because we were doing 2,500 square foot or 250 square meter homes that were beautiful, finished in 7 minutes. You can do it. 7 minutes. And we were timed. And we had a 4,000 unit rollout, and we constructed it in Shanghai, and we shipped them down to Russell Island, Australia, and it's highly successful. So we're using this very similar model that we have a factory that's been identified. Sorry, a place for a factory that's been identified with a regional airport in Poland called Babamost. And that is the city for all distribution for IKEA to Eastern Europe. So they already have the supply chain and the know-how of what it means to bring in, assemble, and ship. So I have air, I have road, and I have rail to get into at least the western part of Ukraine, which then, of course, we'd need to build infrastructure to get into the western part. But the idea is that we would have these prefabricated elements, just like a computer manufacturer. They don't, Compaq, back in the day, IBM, HP, Dell computer, they don't manufacture everything. They have other manufacturers do it, and then they bring them in to assemble it. That's exactly what we're going to be doing in Ukraine. So that if your village needs 50 beds, that's great. But as people get repatriated back in, or in the case of Trojena, as this thing starts to grow in time for the Asian Winter Games, you can add onto it or reuse things, reconfigure. So you need to design for the future, but implement for the now. And I think that can be a great roadmap for the future of the global industry, where we are terrible at either oversizing or undersizing and then having to knock down. And one of the big reasons why we have a very large carbon footprint as an industry is because of demolition. We're terrible with that. The reuse of materials, the reuse of rooms is not something like getting a hand-me-down from your older brother with stinky sneakers. That's not what it's about. We're able to rehabilitate, to reuse and reuse and then retrofit entire cities if it's done properly. But there has to be the courage to say yes. There has to be the training for the people, especially at the local level, of people that are used to building stick structures and, taking doors and studs and making a picnic table because I'm hungry and my crew needs to eat lunch. All that waste needs to go away, right? So there's the practicality of we need to design something for the now, but with an outreach and a design for the future, which means that, we're going to be making a major announcement at the end of this year about how things are going to change in our industry by the tool makers. And that means that we need to have more education and training to designers, both engineers and architects, on how to design properly for manufactured buildings. That is the only way we're going to get through this as a human species. We don't have enough workers coming up through the pipeline. AI is here, and the automation is now a market need. But people don't understand that the design for manufacturing and assembly, called DFMA, it's not educated in schools of architecture or engineering. It's something that is an afterthought when it should be the primary design process on how you do this, because you can get very creative and not have it look like a trailer park. It does not need to be that. So yeah, if I'm swinging from the top of the fence, screaming my lungs out, yeah, if we don't start doing this, and we're going to show leadership with that, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. But DFMA for the next 50 years is going to be a very, very important pivot for the design industry.
Fascinating. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And you started to touch on circular economy concepts or circular construction, which has been growing more popular, and the idea of full life cycle or taking into consideration the full life cycle of a property and the material and the components and the reusability, because that is a massive contributor to carbon emissions. It's also just wasteful and time consuming and messy all around. So there's better ways to do that. And the prefabricated approach where we know the composition of these modules or components, parts, pieces, it all comes together eventually anyways, but being able to track that, and some people are even using blockchain to bring that word up again, to track, essentially offer like a passport, digital
That's right.
passport for these elements. Now, there's one other word that's been associated with blockchain, and I just want to touch on this briefly because I know that I have asked you so many questions thus far, but you're renowned for the metaverse. In fact, I was just reading an article where you were giving your thoughts on it. When people hear metaverse, they're thinking highly speculative or failed Facebook project. What is it really? How is it being used in urban development today?
Great question. The metaverse is not here yet. What we're doing is we're building the building blocks to get there, a pathway, right? We won't know when the metaverse is here. It'll just be part of daily life. It's sort of like, there's not going to be at 11 o'clock news, sound bite saying the metaverse is here. No, that was one of the, not so much mistakes, but I think overenthusiasm of what happened over at Meta. It's not dead. Again, it's evolving into itself. The world of the metaverse is when we do have a singularity of technology and human processes that make the digital realm the same type of experience as the physical realm. It's that cyber-physical relationship, right? And we're starting to see it with things like Ring. I mean, right? It's an app, yet I could be halfway around the world and someone rings my doorbell and I can start having a conversation with them in real time, right? And I can see who they are and blah, 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 blah. Very, very primitive example. But now imagine every aspect of life being that. I have two 14-year-old boys, and during COVID, I was worried that they would lose some of the joys and experiences of being in public school, because it was fifth and sixth grade went away for 2 years. They were on a Zoom type of environment for education. And you know what I know, half the education is social skills, right? Learning who the jerks are, who the good people are, blah, 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 and figuring it out, right? That's part of the human condition of learning. But, I should have listened to the album The Kids Are All Right by The Who more often. Because guess what? They're fine. They have great social skills. They're just fine. They're entering high school next week. And what I found is that the same way that they were using multiplayer online games, things like starting with Minecraft, going into Roblox, winding up with Fortnite, is that the same way that they make friends online, when they see each other physically, there is no change in attitude in how you talk with them. They tease each other online. They tease each other at their Boy Scout meetings. Nothing changes. But what's different for us is that my generation, when it was gaming time, it was like you had like a different head. You had to get onto the console, your PS2, whatever it was, and you were in gaming mode. And then when you got offline, okay, now it's time for business. Now it's time for family time, blah, 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 blah. They don't have a difference. They're the same in the digital world as they are in the physical world. So we have a lot to learn from our kids, and that generation, because once that happens and we start to build the built environment, not just as digital twins, right? Digital twins is a phase that we're going through. It was 3D Max back in the day, and now it's it's Unreal Engine and other things. There will be the next phase. And those next phases that we're experimenting with is to create it on a per project basis that becomes open, meaning that my world can connect with another world. It's not, oh man, you're on the Unity engine, you're in the Unreal Engine, and the two can't talk. No, we're creating our own standards so that we start to piece together in an urban environment all of these different elements so that we can learn from each other. And physically, we're able now to take the walls, floors, and ceilings of our buildings and incorporate IT as a fourth utility, which means we're creating the Internet of Buildings. Those Internet of Buildings are going to be able to do things that we have never been able to do before. For security, let's say there's an active shooter. Because of the way that I have, lock in, lock out processes that all doors have in commercial properties, I can actually track through CCTV cameras where the perpetrator's going. They're going into that building. I'm going to allow the interior doors of that vestibule to be locked, but I'm going to keep the outdoor doors open. Why? Because I want him in there. He goes in, he can't go, and I lock the front doors. Guess what? The building's just caught the perpetrator. Now the police have time to catch up. Interesting things like that we're learning every day about how we can start to do that. Now, how do you control that through the metaverse? Well, if it's a digital twin and I can make it so that I have different modes of understanding. Maybe I want to visit Fifth Avenue, New York, and I want to go shopping in Tiffany's. Well, guess what? Because of the openness nature, I can actually see Tiffany's as an 8K projection, either inside of a goggle or holographically, or just up on my screen, which are going to be different fidelities. But the experience that I want to have is I want to shop at Tiffany's. I just watched Breakfast at Tiffany's. I want to see what it's like today, blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? I'm able now to project everything that's going on in Tiffany's right now with autonomous types of avatars. So the people that are actually there, you may not know who they are personally, but they are they are part of the experience of that piece of that virtual world inside of Tiffany's. But a lot of interesting things have popped up because of that. There's organizations out there in Europe that are telling architectural firms, you know what, you have these 3D models, Revit models, whatever, BIM, and I could stick them onto a gaming engine, and I will sell instances of that to the world. Why? Because people want to experience Times Square or Fifth Avenue or whatever it is. Maybe they want to do e-commerce. Maybe they want to set up, like the next version of Instagram and TikTok is going to be 3D, right? And then how does that work? Why? Because the porn industry is driving it. OnlyFans. Right now, 20% of all those models are AI avatars, and you can't tell the difference, right? Which is only controlled by a half dozen guys that make up these, 20, 30, 40 people rosters, and people are paying big bucks for it. It is driving economies. So now let's pull that back out of the dynamite region of porn and put it into retail, food and beverage, experiences, iconic buildings, Eiffel Towers, things like that. So let's say I want to take Tiffany's and I want to buy an instance of it. So the last person that did the retrofit of that, it's an architectural firm. This group in Europe is saying, I'm going to put it onto a gaming engine and I'm going to sell instances of it so that you now have a revenue stream of a dead piece of digital asset. Sounds like a great plan, right? Holy cow, you just expose a new revenue stream for architects and engineers around the world. Here's the problem. The person that bought that instance of Tiffany's, how much information did you sell them? Did you give them the entire Revit model that also has the security information where they hide the jewelry at night, blah, 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 blah? Or are you just showcasing what is seen by the public and everything else is blocked out? Okay, that solves that problem. But what happens if that guy that just bought the instance of Tiffany's wants to make it a strip club? No one's stopping him. Tiffany finds out. Who do they sue? The architect. Why did you give my information away? We are coming into a world where we're going to be figuring out where the laws are, where the limits are, because that's what the virtual worlds that are leading to the metaverse are going to be providing us real challenges, both from a legal aspect, from a moral aspect, an ethical aspect that we've never had to face before. And I'm friends with some wonderful lawyers, one in England that's really helped me think through this stuff about the digital rights. Who owns them? Because right now, the architectural and engineering contracts, they end at the certificate of occupancy, right? Project's over. Your responsibility's done. It's now the facility manager or the homeowner now that has responsibility. And of course, that becomes the big problem because if I were able to extend out my contract to say, yes, I own the IP of the design because I'm a licensed architect, but because it was an instrument of service, the actual digital asset is owned by the owner. But if I'm now selling the instance of that, which is not in any contract, do we now start to rethink contracts of this circular economy approach to digital assets? So yeah, man, that could be an entire like season-long podcast just on that alone.
So it seems my gears were they were spinning and then grinding. It's a lot to take in, and I think what is most intimidating is what we don't know, what consequences we can't predict about all of this coming together. The one thing that I would actually disagree on slightly is the social consequence of this virtual environments that a lot of Gen Z have grown up in. Maybe it was not a direct consequence of Zoom, but always being on a phone or in a virtual environment, it's led to what they call the Gen Z stare, which is a complete breakdown of the ability to interact socially. A real person is speaking to me now, and you look back with these open eyes. So I think that there are some issues there, but I would agree that online personas have become direct mirrors of who people really are, and they're not afraid to show that. You used to log in and you were someone else. You were either a personification or an avatar.
Or like an anchor for a news show, right? Like all of a sudden you were something else, right? Yeah, yeah.
Right, right. People are acting, but now it's quite seamless, which I guess is okay. But a lot of online personalities are quite frightening, actually. So I hope that they who knows? But that was an unforeseen consequence, and much more of that is going to come out. We can talk about intellectual property and legality, design, so many different directions. But what I would like to wrap up with is offering you a call to action to the folks who are listening. And we get people from all over the world, all different jobs. Some folks are just connecting the dots. That's how I describe myself. Others have straightforward linear tasks. They're analysts, they're accountants, they are developers, they are investors. But if you were to offer with a broad stroke, a piece of advice, something that people need to tune into, a mindset, a mentality, an action that has to be taken today. Someone pauses the podcast and says, okay, from now on, I'm doing this. What should they be doing?
Listening to your podcast. How's that for a promo?
Well, I appreciate I appreciate that.
Well, so this gets down to some uncomfortable truths, but there's two things I hope that people start to do, and that is to ask consequential questions. You may not have the answers to a consequential question, but raise it, discuss it, because the truth will open up over time about what that consequential question is. It's a hard thing to practice because sometimes consequential questions can be questions about yourself, right? And looking in the mirror and really understanding, why am I doing this? Is it through a scarcity model that I want to get my piece of the pie because there's a limited amount of pie? Or is it an abundance model where you're giving and the abundance of that energy will reciprocate and almost be like a domino effect? And by practicing abundance, I've found that it's an amazing amount of doors that open. Again, that positivity, that idea of not being Pollyanna. I mean, I'm from New York City. I'm watching over my shoulder. I get it, right? But I also grew up in the most scarce environment in the world, which is New York City. I mean, just getting to work, coming out of work, the traffic that you want to get 1 inch ahead of that other guy, right? Um, you have to let go of that, and that's a hard thing to do, and really embrace the idea of abundance. But I think the most important thing that is reciprocal with abundance is that I really hope that this word is stopped being weaponized. And I think it needs to be brought back into business more and not be about me too. And that's about the word love. I think we need to use it more in business because, the idea of, Coldplay outing, some CEO and an HR manager, that's cute. It's fun. It's a meme. Serious consequences for the people that actually hurt. But at the end of the day, it's not that type of love. I'm talking about love of thyself, love between colleagues, love of the work you're doing. And be prideful of it because, on this planet Earth, it's a spaceship. And the human species will only survive in this form of the Earth if we have clean water, fresh food, and shelter. So what we do in the built environment is a noble, noble cause. And I think we need the words of abundance and love to actually bolster that so that, we actually have a great experience while we're on this, this blue marble hurtling through space. We have a limited amount of time. I'm personally going through that right now with my family where, terminal cancer is not something to sneeze at. It's a real deal. Hits you emotionally, spiritually, everywhere else. But I'm learning a lot, about that. I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about my family. I'm learning about humans. And if we have a little bit more compassion that way and understand that there is an equal amount of evil in this world to good. So don't, again, be a Pollyanna and have your head in the ground, but don't shy away from doing good, right? Doing good with yourself, doing good with your family, doing good with the community. Because again, we only have one shot at this. And I think that is probably the biggest message that I could at least pass on. And, if one listener out there gets it, well, then I've done my job.
Amazing and impactful. The consequential questions, the abundance mindset, and love for thyself, love for thy work, and all the people that are around us and are impacted by our work. And I agree that urban development and cities are one of those ways to have the biggest impact. It's literally the world as we've known it, as it is, and as it will be known. It's just so fascinating to me, and it's so exciting to talk about this with you and all the amazing research that you've done to advance the industry that we get to innovate upon. So, Paul, thank you so much for the conversation. I'm going to have links to your social media and your books as well in the show notes so people can scroll down. They can click on all of that. I hope someone in the least is inspired, but definitely reaches out. I know that you're available on social media. Actually, that's how this podcast came about, right? So the power of connections. Thank you again, and really wishing you all the best in your continued work. I know there's going to be so much more to see, and all the best with your life as well.
Thank you, Matt.